Hi, everyone who's joining us. We'll just wait for 30 more seconds before we start. Um, Thank you for being on time, and thank you, Praveen, for being early, which gives us a few seconds to prepare always.
Certainly, certainly.
We'll start just in 30 seconds. Awesome. I think we're good to go. Um, Hello, everyone. Those who are joining us for the first time, I'll briefly share about what Democracy Samvaad is and what Indian School of Democracy is, and then I'll introduce our speaker for the day. So Indian School of Democracy is a non-partisan organization that works with young people who want to get into politics and become principled political leaders. Democracy Samvad is a weekly series of dialogues that we do with people who are practitioners in politics from across party lines, just to have a more honest, candid, and approachable conversation about politics, because probably TV debates don't allow for that. So this is an attempt to bring politics to home, and just learn different aspects of politics. With us today, we have Mr. Praveen Chakravarty, and we are just really excited to have him because in past we've had conversations with elected representatives, with policy makers, and Mr. Praveen brings a very unique perspective. So I think a lot of you who signed up already know him, but I'm going to quickly share a little bit of his background. So Mr. Praveen has been in the private sector, in the banking sector for over 2 decades before he made the shift. He's from Chennai. He's an alum of BITS Pilani and Wharton Business School. He was the MD of BNP Paribas before he decided in 2010 to work with the UPA government on two big projects. One was Aadhaar and the other was National Skill Development Agency, to bring digital efficiency into the work that the government's been doing. Now, I think like all of you know, he's the chairperson of the Data Analytics Cell and a senior party member in the Indian National Congress. He's also been very vocal, like he reads a lot, so he's been very vocal about his opinions and thoughts on policy issues. He also runs something called Noise to Signal, which simplifies policy issues for a lot of people, and he also writes regularly on multiple platforms. He's written with the former Prime Minister, Mr. Manmohan Singh, and P. Chidambaram as well. So today, I think we're going to talk about just politics. What are the pathways in politics? Why should one join politics? And also try to focus a little bit on data in politics and what's the need for it. The format will be such that I'll ask around 5 or 6 questions in the first 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up to our audience. So audience, please feel free to write your questions as comments on Facebook Live, and one of our team members will make sure that we get to ask it. So yeah, that was the introduction. Welcome, Mr. Praveen. Super excited to have you. I think
Thank you. Thank you.
my first question is going to be a very obvious one. That someone as successful as you, someone who's had the exposure, who's worked in the private sector and was making an amazing living for himself, why did you decide to join politics?
You know, when I graduated from Wharton, more than 2 decades ago, if somebody had told me that I would be in Indian politics someday, I would have just laughed. So, in that sense, I don't think this is some sort of a planned kind of chartered path into politics. One thing led to another. I mean, there was one constant theme, though. I was always very curious about policy, public life, and society at large. So I wasn't really just interested in either investment banking or venture capital or any of those. I mean, certainly those were professions, but I always was very curious about some of the other aspects. And I guess it's that curiosity that really led me to first get involved in an election campaign, then actually jump into government almost overnight. I mean, actually, I recall I just went into my office on Monday morning at BNP Paribas, which I was running as an investment, the investment bank, and I said, I'm leaving. I'm going to go join government and work as a volunteer. It was, it was almost as sudden as that. But then I was very clear. And also, fortunately, financially, I was all right. I was okay. So that was also I know that's a big consideration for many, many people. And I think it should be. Because the last thing you want is people going into politics for money or to earn a living. Politics should be about passion and should be about principles and ideologies and some clear intent. So to me, in that sense, it wasn't so much a planned thing, but there came a point in time when a lot of things got together, and then when I went into government, I had a great stint. I absolutely enjoyed what I did. I got exposed to many people. I actually got exposed to how I didn't know anything about my own country, which was very, very humbling. And then I got involved more and more in party affairs. And one thing led to another, and then finally, I was invited by the then Congress President, Mr. Rahul Gandhi, to join the party in 2018, which is when I did formally. But I did know a lot of the leaders in the party before that.
Awesome. I'm almost tempted to ask, when you made the shift from a very different sector to politics, what were some of the myths about politics and India that got busted? Like you said, you got to learn about the country a lot. So what were some of the myths or unexpected things that you got to learn about both politics and the country?
Yeah, I used to write a lot about policy and all of that even before I formally entered politics. And then I think very quickly in the first 6 months after I entered party politics, which is which is the real deal, as some people may say, I realized how I was completely wrong in almost everything that I had thought of and I had imagined. And see, I think, and even today, I believe I'm still learning. I'm still learning a lot almost every day. And I believe politics is really the true reflection of our society. You may like it, you may not like it, but you can't deny that it is perhaps the truest reflection of our society at large. And that, I think, which, like I said before, is a very humbling experience, because you think you're an Indian, you think you're well educated, you've traveled, you know a lot and all of that, and then you realize, no, you actually know nothing. You don't know your own country. So I think for me, that was like the biggest, almost eye opener. That wow, the realities on the ground are just so different. And it comes down to, I think, incentives at every level. Economists have always known about incentives, but for some reason, we tend to think of everything from our point of view. It's almost like that, story in the Jainism religion about 6 blind men and an elephant, right? So everyone that touches and feels one part feels that's a certain thing, but then no one really has a full picture. And I think politics gives you that. And the second most important thing that I realized is what the Lebanese mathematician calls skin in the game. I think it is very, very, very different to be on the outside and not have skin in the game and think about things versus having skin in the game. And I'll explain what I mean by skin in the game. It's about incentives. So let's say I'm a policy advisor, okay, or I work in government in UPA too. If something went wrong based on what I recommended, I have nothing to lose. My life goes on. And that's true of almost all technocrats and lateral entrants and all of that. And almost all the costs of that wrong policy or wrong decision are borne by politicians who have to face people on the ground. So, but when things go right, we all take the credit. And this asymmetry of incentives and rewards is actually what is problematic unless people jump into politics. Because when something goes wrong, like it did for me in the 2019 elections, yes, I will put up my hand and say, beat me up. I need to take that loss. It's a law. So, and I think that is very, very important. Only when you establish that do you establish trust with other party members, with people. Otherwise, you're always seen as someone who just comes in, gives some advice. Okay, if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, fine, you have nothing to lose. Go back to your whatever you were doing earlier and life moves on. And I think that's a very, very critical part.
Yeah, I think learning to take that responsibility and having skin in the game is so important, especially for, I think, our generation, because we're used, it's not often that we're given opportunities where the buck stops at us in some ways. My next question is about that, because most of our target audience is people who really want to get into politics, but don't know the how. They don't know the pathways into politics. So can you share, because you do work with a lot of young people since you head the data cell, there are a lot of skilled people who probably are around you. So what are some of the pathways and different pathways that people can learn to make their inroads into politics, familiarize themselves with politics before they think of contesting?
Sure. See, politics, like you said, is not just electoral politics. I think politics, in my view, is first and foremost, the best way to learn politics is actually through organizational roles and responsibilities within a political party. And that is, these are almost two different worlds inside a political party. One is the external facing, that everybody in the media reads about and knows about and people facing, versus the other side, which is organizational responsibilities within a party. And the political parties, certainly the national parties, but also most of the regional parties are very large organizations, very, very large organizations. So how do you work within the party? How do you learn organizational skills and roles and responsibilities? I think is a very good first step for people that want to get into politics. And I think that teaches one a lot about how to take everybody along, what are incentives, what is the party platform, what matters in elections, what matters in governance. A lot of these things one gets to learn through some very solid organizational responsibilities. And I've been very, very fortunate that that's what I have had over the last 2 years or so, which is very strong organizational responsibilities. And it's an immense learning experience before one can decide whether they want to go into electoral politics or whether they want to be, as a policy person, or whether they want to continue in organizational responsibilities.
I'm almost I really want to ask this because I completely agree with you that party positions are a great way because you get to meet a myriad of people, but it's not easy. It's not as easy as me walking into a party and say that I align with your ideology and your thinking, so give me a position. So how does one even negotiate and become noticed by those who are responsible for giving these party positions or just involvement, voluntary positions?
Proactiveness. I mean, really, that's what matters. I get so many people who come to me and tell me, give me something. And then I have a few people who come and tell me, here's what the party should be doing, and this is how I can help do this. I think there's a wide difference between the two. And I'll give you my own example. Some of those of you who kind of watched my work in the party would have heard of something called Shakti, which was an initiative that was launched by the party by me after I joined. What most of you may not know is Shakti was conceived even before I joined the party formally. It was an idea. It was a concept that I had discussed with both Mr. Gandhi and many others for many months, even before I joined the party. I think it's that, because it's not a private sector company where someone's interviewing somebody for a job and then you come in and then you're told what to do. I think this ability to take initiative and be proactive is extraordinarily critical, especially because in a political party, certainly I can speak for the Congress party, it's not like someone's telling you what to do on a daily basis. You have to have that initiative and that gumption to come and say, yes, you could be wrong, you could be right, but at least you've thought through something and you have a plan on how you can execute it and how your skills can help contribute to that execution. And that, I think, is a very key area for getting into an organizational position.
That's quite validating for us, because internally we call our participants as political entrepreneurs, because I think it requires a lot of those entrepreneurial skills. I think you somehow answered my next question, but it would be great for you to elaborate on it, which is, what are the skills that are important for a young person to make a political mark? So one would be this proactiveness, as I'm hearing. What are some of the other skills that are important for young people to be in politics these days?
I think first and foremost is curiosity. I mean, I think you just have to be curious. You have to acknowledge that most of us don't know enough or don't know anything. So you come in, be very curious. I know I'm not giving specific skill sets. I know people may think, oh, you must know machine language programming or something like that. No. But like I said, I think these are some attributes that are very, very important, which is curiosity, the ability to take initiative. And I think you put it well, which is the political entrepreneurship. So anyone that's seen entrepreneurship, what are the skills of an entrepreneur? It's not like every entrepreneur is a great computer programmer or a great factory owner, or they just bring in a lot of other skills. And that, I think, is really, really key. There is ample opportunity for young people now. And I'll tell you why. It is because of the disruption we're witnessing. In politics, certainly it was happening before COVID, but I think COVID's just accelerated some of that disruption. And this is where I think young people can play an enormous role. But I would caution that we have to be careful to assume that technology is almost like the panacea for all our problems. That's not true. If someone's just curious, can take the initiative, and have, obviously, needless to say, people skills. You have to work with people. It's much easier to do that when you're younger than it is at my age, because at my age you have set notions and very difficult to to have these in terms of who you can get along with and things like that. But you must have people skills that you may not agree with almost 80-85% of people around you. You may even not be on the same wavelength or even the same planet as they are. I mean, I may not agree with more than half of my party's positions, but it requires that skill to be able to work with people and to convince them through meticulous attention to detail. I think that's the fourth skill, if you were to ask me, that attention to detail. Too often I find and certainly true of many people outside the politics, they come in with and say, okay, they make all these grand statements and assertions and all these other things. Or your electoral loss was because of this, or your victory was because of this, or this governance, this policy is wrong, or that policy is wrong. I always push back and say, what have you done? Can you convince me, and how? And I think that is very, very, very important, because by nature, you have to understand that when you come into politics, you come into a world where you are wrong unless you prove yourself right, rather than the other way around. You're correct unless someone proves you wrong. You're wrong unless you prove yourself right.
That raises the stakes quite a bit. Before we move to data, I have one question, and I think you're a great person to answer that, because you write about a lot of things. You are aware. I think like those who follow you know that you are aware about a whole range of things. And I think in this era where there's information overload almost, it would be great for our audience to get some insights on how do you keep up with everything that's happening? How do you process, learn, put yourself out there to be just more aware about the political happenings?
Like I said, curiosity and read and talk to people. I mean, I think, of course, now I also have a very strong inclination to data. So I'm constantly looking at what I can learn through data that I. So I'm constantly looking for various numbers and statistics, and it may seem innocuous or meaningless to many people, but I'm trying to see what is that what is the message it's conveying. But you're right. I mean, it is extremely important to be aware of various things. So my simple recommendation is to just be curious and read heck of a lot. Just read.
Yeah.
And the reason I write is because it forces me to think and synthesize and crystallize all that I've read into a specific argument. And so that's more an output. But really, the inputs are just curiosity and voracious appetite to read.
Awesome. I think now to data, which is how, and I don't want to just ask in current slice of time, I think in the past decade or more, how have you seen the role of data evolve in Indian elections, especially elections? I think, like, what has the role of data been according to you?
See, first and foremost, data is not just restricted to elections or any specific aspect. Businesses use data a lot. Why do businesses use data? They use data to understand their customers better, their competitors better, their brand better, their employees better. It's exactly the same thing that applies here. You should use data for organizational reasons, which is your own party workers, leaders. Second is, of course, to know what your customers, in this case, voters, think about their perceptions. Third, of course, for some information about your competitors. But I want to clarify one thing and be very categorical about this. Data is one of many inputs. It is not the sole input, neither is it the most important input for any decision. I have said this consistently from the time in February 2018 when I took over as the chairman of when we started the data analytics department. It is one of many inputs. So let me illustrate this with an example. Let's say there is a Congress working committee or a big party strategy meeting. So there are many people sitting around the table discussing. It could be about what should the party's strategy be for a particular policy, or what should the party's organizational structure be, or whatever it may be, or what should the party's slogan be. Now there's a lot of experience in that room, and they're all discussing. I say have one more chair there, and that chair is for data. So if you're saying which slogan is great, that will provide an input as to what people think which slogan is better of the three choices, what your party workers think which is better. You may take it, you may not take it, you may consider it, but it provides one of many inputs. This is just one example of how almost in every decision, there could be one input that could come from data. And I will tell you, politics and politicians intuitively understand the need for data. Where data is available, I think what is lacking in my view is the interpretation of data and translating that into simplistic decision points. That I think is the most important. I mean, I could keep going on and on about vote share to seat share and there is no correlation between these two variables, or this is not the direction of causation, and all of that means nothing. the ability to say, oh, this means maybe if you do these, maybe if you change the candidate, you may actually get the support of this section of voters. But if you continue with this candidate, you may not get that. And that is a decision point. And that's just one input, like I said. So I want to be very clear that data is not just for elections, data is across in almost all areas of politics. I mean, today when it is peacetime, as they say, when there are no elections and it's peacetime in political parties, many people use data for finding out what are the issues with people and those types of things. It cuts across. It is not the most important. It's not even the sole input. It's one of many inputs, and the ability to interpret data is perhaps the key skill set that's needed.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up for audience, and we've already started getting questions from it. I'm going to pick Akash Singh's question first. He says that I am from AIPC Nagpur, and we have worked with Vidhan Sabha and Lok Sabha candidates during pre and post elections. How do we explain them the importance of data down to the wire, and also how do we explain the importance of data to the workers, the party workers, who may not intuitively get it?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and which is what I said. I think the ability to interpret and communicate that is very, very critical. And I'll give you one example. Very often people would come up and say, oh, in this assembly segment, your vote share was this, and the opponent's vote share is this. And if you take your vote share up 3 percentage points, you will win this election. Or they may say, here are the list of booths that you should focus on. I would actually synthesize and crystallize all of that into one simple finding for that candidate, which is, if these are the list of 6,000 or 10,000 houses of families in this assembly constituency. Here is the name and the address. If you can convince them to vote for you, you will win the election. If you cannot, you will lose the election. That is something that they will immediately understand. And I think this is where a lot of us, and I include myself in that category, is we still have to learn that. We still have to learn. We just throw numbers today. We just throw this percentage, that percentage, and all of that. We must be able to cull out that most important takeaway. And I always tell my analysts, don't think in numbers, think in Hindi, or think in English, think in the local language when you're communicating. So, and I think that's really the most important. I have not met a single politician, be it someone contesting at the panchayat level or someone contesting at the Lok Sabha level, who will just dismiss any finding from data outright, saying that this. They will all listen to it. If you explain to them exactly what you mean, whether they consider it, not consider it, is up to them. But they will absolutely certainly not dismiss it if presented to them in the right manner.
Thank you. I think focusing more on that interpretation is the key takeaway that I'm taking. We have an interesting question from Lipsa. She asks that what would a startup political party look like in terms of its organizational elements? A more fundamental question is, what's the need for organizing into parties for politics?
Well, I know, we get carried away with examples from the corporate world or the private sector because that's what most of us are familiar with. And so, the almost the canned answer that people would give to something like this is companies have organizations. And so political parties are also organized. They perform in some sense a similar function. I kind of disagree with that. I think political parties are very fundamentally different from organizations. What I think the question perhaps is it's a very good question. It's very different and relevant in today's context is because traditionally, let us say especially I can speak for a national party. Let's say I'm a national party and I have organizational responsibility and I sit in Delhi. If I want to know what is happening in Hathras, for example, I want the details. The first things we all learn is never to get our information from the media. I think that's the first and foremost that all of you should know. Um, so what is happening in Hathras? In the traditional world, I would have had to call, let's say, in the Congress party terminology, my general secretary in charge of Uttar Pradesh, who will then call the Uttar Pradesh State Congress President. And the Uttar Pradesh State Congress President will then call the Hathras District President. And then the Hathras District President will call that block president in that village, and then get the real information. This is why you needed an organization. You need an organization. Of course, I have many young people arguing with me. Now you can just go directly from Delhi to that village through the use of technology, through the use of data, because almost everyone has a phone. You could, and that's a very valid argument. That's a very valid argument. But I still think you can't just bypass the entire organizational setup. So I think you will have to complement and combine both. But this is one example, and almost a very powerful example, of why an organization is needed. And this is why you need to organize, because you can't be everywhere, and you will need foot soldiers who will then need to organize themselves into traditional hierarchies. And almost in that sense, a hierarchy, though I may dislike it, is inevitable.
Yeah, especially for the scale that we work at National Park. We have a question from Sulabh, who's saying that we are talking about the data which is available to all, yet one particular party is making the best of it, and the others are not effective enough. So where are we going wrong? Quality of data, source or analysis, interpretation, or narrative weaving?
Yeah, again, I think there is a conflation here in terms of outcomes versus the process. I'm not sure there is evidence to suggest that there's only one party that's monopolized how it uses data. See, I think there are two different things. One is you may have data. The second is, how do you engage with people? Now, you may say that I would like to reach out to all young women in Kasaragod village in Kerala, and I may have all of that data. What does reach out mean? How do you reach out? How do you engage? How do you engage with them? That requires enormous resources. So it's not enough that I know all the young women in Kasaragod and Kerala, but I also have to have a way to reach out to them, and that requires enormous resources. And I think it's fair to say that's perhaps where one party seems to have a certain monopoly in terms of getting all the resources, or certainly bullying all the resources to their side.
Yes. I think other question, this is not from an audience, but it's coming to me. What are the challenges that you face? Because clearly it's a combination of multiple things. There's technical skill, there's people skills, and just ability to put stuff together where there are a lot of stakeholders involved. In your work with the party, and you've played an important role in the 2019 elections. So not the technical challenges, but you as a party worker, what are some of the challenges that you face that you're still kind of grappling with? Because we want to keep it real for our audience. It's not easy. Politics is probably one of the most difficult things. So would love to get your thoughts on what are some of the challenges that you face.
Yeah, so we first started working, I think it started with the 4 state elections. I mean, I think the first time that we kind of really got very extensively with elections as a department was in the Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Telangana, Chhattisgarh elections. And we tried out certain new things. Remember, we were, 8 months old in a 140-year-old party. So, okay, like I said, you are wrong unless you're proven right in politics. So there will be that certain element of healthy skepticism about what you bring to the table. What do you know? You've just come in. I've been here, seen, done that. Sort of resistance. And I think that's a real challenge, and that can be overcome only, only by working with people and explaining to them how you can bring value, how you can add value. Um, and then we worked extensively in the parliament elections. And I think one thing really shook us apart, I mean, certainly kind of rattled me, was the scale and the enormity. I don't think, I simply don't, any activity or challenge, and I'm worked in Aadhaar, in the initial, the challenge of scale, but being involved in national elections in India with 800 million voters is something that I don't think prepares you for. For each candidate, they're looking at their constituency. But for us, when we're sitting in Delhi and trying to do this at that scale, I think the scale was just way too enormous for us to be able to come to terms with. For a department that was, less than a year old, actually. So it was too many things happening too fast. The second challenge we faced was, certainly, I mean, I don't want to hide this, resources. I think resources, I am not going to diminish that challenge. It is an enormous challenge. You could be, whatever, the smartest and the brightest and all of that, but you will ultimately need resources. And the third is, just trying to help people. And there is this very easy temptation that most people fall into, which is they take an outcome of a certain election and then they try and correlate and imply causation, saying, oh, it's because of this outcome happened. And I was very clear when we won 3 out of the 4 state elections. I was on record saying this was not because of us or because of our input. It was just, we tried out new things, it worked out, it may not work out. So but the most important lesson was that everybody acknowledged and realized this is perhaps something that we should adopt as a practice, which is the whole idea of trying to get inputs from party workers, simple things. Who should be the candidate? Is one of the things that parties grapple with very seriously, and it leads to like really, really contentious discussions and animated discussions. We came and said, let's ask our party workers on the ground, who should the candidate be? It's just one input. It was never done in the party before. It was never done in the party before. So obviously it means there's a certain disruption. A certain disruption will always bring with it a certain set of detractors who benefit from the status quo, but it'll also bring in supporters who like the change. So these are all various challenges. It's almost, I mean, it's something that I live through almost every day, trying to ensure that disruption is not too disruptive. And anyone who's involved in technology knows this. It's be it bank computerization. How do you convince the clerks, the bank tellers, that putting a computer is not necessarily going to be bad for them, or it's good for overall this one? So, and it's something very similar that we go through in the party.
You mentioned ticket distribution as one of the things that data can help with, because you're going and asking people, and there's now a mechanism to figure out who should interpret the data or what people are saying. I would love for our audience to get some insights on winnability. It's become this buzzword that no one is able to unpack, right? Everyone is talking about it, but not many are unpacking it. Is that even a right word to use? Or more broadly, what are the criteria that parties consider when deciding candidates?
No, I agree with you. I was quite perplexed by that phrase winnability when I first heard about it. I mean, this is like saying in the corporate world, I'll come up with a product that will win in the marketplace. Of course, you take that as granted. It's just that, do you know what winnability means? What defines winnability? See, I'll tell you, this is something that what makes a certain electoral outcome possible. If anyone told you that they know, they're just lying. They're just absolutely lying. Okay. I've had conversations. I know people with PhD in political science, to people who really look through data, to some very senior editors and journalists and very seasoned politicians. I think the real politicians know that they don't know. We don't know. And in some sense, that's the beauty of democracy also. I know we find it very hard to grapple with what happened. We always want, as humans, we always want explanations for things. We refuse to accept that it's okay to not have an explanation. So I don't know what is winnability. I do not know what determines a certain outcome, what does not. I can only point out a few facts using data and numbers when it comes to elections. It is now shown and established through empirical data that nearly half of the people that vote in elections decide who to vote for either a day before or on the day of the election, of the voting. Now, that's a substantial number. That's a substantial number. Maybe they woke up on the wrong side of the bed. Maybe their journey to the polling booth had something that made them change their mind. We don't know. We don't know any of this, but this is an established fact. Second, this idea that performance matters is still unproven empirically. There is, just like you can't explain faith, you can't explain electoral outcomes in that sense, in a conclusive manner. There are many candidates or many parties, and in fact, I've written about this. If you take it in economic terms, you measure all these sort of GDP and inflation and this and all of that, it has almost no relationship to the electoral outcome or the outcome. Neither does the negative hold. You could have really had your lives kind of completely disrupted through, say, demonetization or COVID, but it's not necessary that translates into how you vote. So I think we must acknowledge that we don't know. We will learn. We will continue to learn almost every. But that only means that you just have to keep trying. You just have to keep trying, because you don't know tells you that there are no shortcuts. So I know many people will say cost. I'm not even. Yeah, that I think is a big used to be a big factor. Again, I think that is perhaps going away or becoming less and less of a factor. It's not about what you promise or what you say in a manifesto. It's not about how well your election rallies are. It's not about how good your campaigns are. It's not about how good the candidate is. Perhaps it's a little bit of all of these. We don't know. So I don't think there are like top 3 winnable factors.
That's not reassuring, but real. I think we need to learn to deal with that uncertainty and be on our toes, and yet use data and not discard it completely. There's a question. I'm going to club Ashutosh's and Deepak's questions. So Ashutosh's questions is just like data is becoming important. I think everyone's talking about social media. So what's this role of social media in politics today? And Deepak's question is that there are many. His question is actually how many fake social media media IDs would be there that spread misinformation about the rival political parties. And then how does the back end of data analytics actually process this? Is there an information or a mechanism to skip or filter this data to make it scientifically correct?
I used to get this a lot, which is people kind of almost conflate social media and data analytics. Yes, the two are related to, in some sense, but it actually, they're quite different. They're quite different. Data analytics is about empirics. It's about trying to, if you want to talk to voters, you have to know who your voters are. You have to know who they are. You have to be able to categorize them in different aspects, and you have to be able to reach out to them. I'll give you a simple example. People talk about social media and Twitter. Let's say you have 1 million followers. Can you tell me how many of those million are Indian voters? Nobody can.
But I think these channels, all social media, all social media platforms do give you an analytics of who's following you from where. So location wise, I think that level of data is possible to get at least. I don't know how many of them would vote, how many of them are from your constituency, and so on and so forth. But
Correct. So what social media does is it's taken mass media and gone one level closer in terms of directly dealing with people. So, for example, in a TV channel, I won't know India TV how many people are watching or who are the viewers. If it's an India TV Twitter handle, then I will know from where are these people following me. That's it's not the whole. It's not the full story, right? We don't know so much more about the people that are following you or responding to you that you would like to, and that's what data analytics is about. Now, in terms of fake news on social media, and I think we have a controversy that's playing out, not controversy, we have an issue that's playing out right before our eyes with Facebook India specifically, and I made some public comments about it. I think WhatsApp is a real menace to society, in my view, and I'm not going to mince words about it. I think I'm convinced that there is more harm than good from WhatsApp to society. And why do I say only WhatsApp? Because in WhatsApp, you hide behind anonymity. Everywhere else, Facebook, Twitter, even if you created a fake, the company knows who you are in some sense. There's a phone number that you've given. There is in WhatsApp, you have no idea who's starting this message, how it's spreading. It's all almost like it's a dark underworld operation, and I think that is terrible. And I have plenty of evidence, personal encounters. I've been to many villages in, say, Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh, where older people, people that are somewhat probably not as savvy, have just really fallen for some of these rumors and fake news and changed their lives or really impacted their lives in great deal. And I think that's a real problem. How many are there? I think there's a large number. There is, I don't know the exact percentage, but I think it's fair to say India is probably the largest market for fake news and perhaps hate news through social media.
Yeah, I think it's scary to think of it that way, because it's not just about elections or politics, it's all pervasive. It really controls the psychology of people, us as human beings. And I know Harari talks a lot about it. I want to ask you about grassroots politics. So I think a lot of young people, they think of entry through politics, especially electoral politics, and not just being a party member, but if they want to contest, it's probably easier in most cities or cities or villages to contest for a sarpanch election or a councillor election. What would your thought be on that? Since I think, like, being a party member, you may be involved in multiple levels of elections, but specifically at that entry level, at the third tier, what are some of the things that they can start doing now to be seen as a potential candidate by parties or as an independent by voters?
I think it's one of the greatest avenues that is very underutilized for people that want to kind of get into electoral politics. I think at the third tier, as you call it, the local body, it could be a municipal corporation, it could be a panchayat, it could be a zilla parishad. In fact, within the Congress Party, I can tell you there's an entire organization called the Panchayati Raj Sangathan, which only looks at all the different local body elections, who are the candidates that have emerged from there, what are some of the characteristics that they've exhibited, could they be groomed into leadership positions. And I can actually give you some examples. There's one sitting member of parliament called Jyoti Mani from Tamil Nadu. She started off really as a corporator in a small village in Karur district in Tamil Nadu. And she's risen all the way now to become a member of parliament. So I think it's a very underutilized, underappreciated, but a great avenue and an opportunity for young people that want to get into politics. This is how it happens in America. So in America, people get in through local politics. So, and I also believe that's where in traditional parties, in big parties, it's probably easier to kind of get in through electoral politics because you're doing a few things. You're signaling to the party that you're interested in electoral politics. You're signaling that you have the gumption and the seriousness to go and contest in an election. And third, you just learn a lot. I mean, I have almost the greatest respect for elected politicians of India or in any democracy, because that's probably the toughest thing and you learn a lot. So I would actually absolutely encourage and really tell people that want to get into politics to actually start with local politics.
Awesome. And ISD focuses specifically on people who want to become sarpanchs or corporators and councillors. So that's happy news as well. I think we can take this as a second last question, which is Sulabh's question, that based on your experience and learning, what would be that one disruptive idea you would like to try or you're thinking of trying from a data point of view?
I don't know if there is one disruptive idea. I think generally, if we could use a little bit more inputs that data provides into decision making, I think that in general would be very disruptive for our politics. I think the problem today, at least in some of our politics, is decisions are still being taken in almost a huddle. And what data can do is kind of break open that huddle and say, no, here's what. So, because what happens if you start taking decisions in a huddle, it's almost like two different parts. I mean, the inside of a party looks very different from the real people that they're supposed to represent. And I think data can play a big role and an important role in breaking open these somewhat glass barriers between the two.
Yeah, I think that would be pretty amazing. Akanksha has a question, which is around how can we as young people interested in politics start learning about data, not just for elections, but also from a governance point of view, like how are elected representatives doing in terms of the performance and the promises? Are there any avenues that you recommend for them to become more familiar, both in learning about data and interpretation, like you said, of it? How can they get started?
Yeah, see, I mean, I think there are some very good organizations that do a lot of good work about, if you're specifically asking about candidates and, candidates data and all of that. Association for Democratic Reforms, ADR, is one. PRS Legislative Research is another one that puts out a lot of information. But they may not be about candidates. Or they may not be about your local representative, an MLA or an MP or a sarpanch or a corporator. See, I'll tell you why that is the case. It goes back to what I said about elections. There is no evidence that attending parliament, for example, improves your chances of winning the next election. So where is the incentive? There is no evidence that, you being on the ground in your constituency 5 days a week increases your chances any more than someone who's not. And this is almost a very dangerous thing for democracy, because there's no evidence, and hence people, there's almost an apathy to this. And that is why you will not find a lot of data on very specific candidates or anything. But I think as far as parliament, and even I think maybe at the state assembly level, PRS legislature does a lot of, it puts out some amount of data on the local legislators, questions asked and those types of things. How many school admissions have they helped with, or how many hospital admissions have your local person helped with? I don't think that data is very easy to get.
Yeah. I think My Netha and other apps, again, governance, Mumbai has a lot of other startups which are trying to do this. We can link it up on our Facebook from what we are gathering. I think I kept the last 5 minutes as open for you to just share your thoughts for young people, whether it's a message or things that they should do, just anything that you would want to share with our audience who's interested in politics.
See, I can only, I can tell you somewhat from my personal experience. Get into politics. It is the real deal. It is one of the most fascinating experiences that you will have if you really care. If you care, you must get into politics. Second, if it is not easy, by no stretch of imagination it is easy, and it's not easy for anybody. Okay, so in that, if it is any solace, you're not the only one facing difficulties. Almost everybody else is facing the same difficulty. Okay, so in that sense, it's a test of real perseverance and tenacity, but it's an extraordinarily rich learning experience. So don't be scared, don't be afraid, get in. Third, don't form opinions based on what you read in the media. I can't stress that enough in today's India. Draw your own conclusions, speak to people, get involved, get your hands dirty, don't pass judgments without knowing things in detail, and learn to draw your own conclusions about what you see around you in terms of your politics. I think that's the third most important thing I would say. And I think lastly, I don't think, if anything, I would argue that it is perhaps an opportune time for people that are outside the system to actually get involved and be part of the system. Remember, politics is not just electoral politics. I think I want to keep stressing that, because there's this big conflation in people's minds about politics being only electoral politics. It's not. So there is just 100 different ways that you can get involved, participate in the entire political process, learn a lot, and actually contribute, to something that's meaningful. So absolutely, please come.
Thank you so much for that encouraging
Thank you.
presentation. It was very, very insightful discussion. So I'm sorry for those questions I could not take. I think we had some last questions about AI, but we hope to have you again once we launch the year-long program to keep this dialogue going. I wanted to make a request of our audience. So Indian School of Democracy is a non-partisan organization, and we are also a crowd-funded organization, which means that to allow for our participants to come from all parts of the country and for us to support their journeys, we want to be able to give scholarships so that we really have some of the best and the most competent people joining politics. We'll post a link to a crowdfunding campaign that we're running right now. It would be great if you can consider supporting us on that. And yeah, thank you for listening. Thank you for joining.
You.
Thank you, Mr. Praveen. Really amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. I had fun. Thank you.
Bye.